Hello, everyone. Welcome to Authors in Conversation. I am very excited and thrilled to have an opportunity to sit down, because I'm not standing, and chat with these two gentlemen. Both of them are award winning authors, and both have written poems. As a matter of fact, Winfrey's book, all of your that's all you've written, correct, Winfrey?
Poetry, yes. Both books
Poetry.
are poetry.
And Richard has written a lot of poetry, but Richard, from our conversation, you talked about how you had a challenge finding a market for poetry. So perhaps the two of you can have something to talk about tonight in our exchange of authors and conversation. This is a conversation with some of the 150 authors that will be a part of the Sunshine State Book Festival, which will take place in Gainesville, Florida, January 27th and 28th at Trinity United Methodist Church. I hope you will be there because it is the goal of the Writers Alliance of Gainesville to bring readers and authors together. And so our goal is to give you an opportunity to hear directly from the people, the voices of the people who sit down and write these books that we pick up and read. So, Richard, Gartee, and Renfro Aldu, thank you both for being here tonight.
Thank you for inviting us.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Well, first, let's talk about just the writing process. You guys have written, both of you have won awards, and let me just say congratulations to you on your award winning writing.
Thank you.
When you're writing, are you thinking about, I'm going to submit this someplace, or are you just writing? Do you think it's going to be award winning? Do you know off the bat, I think this is award winning? Let me submit it.
No, I don't think that way. I, I, let me address poetry first because we both write poetry, and I think this might be true for you as well. That poetry is more for me just something, an emotional observation that has to come out. I'm not. For many years, I wrote poetry without necessarily thinking about where it was going to be submitted afterwards, just to get something inside you that you just want to get out, or something that you see that you just want to set down on paper. And I did not think at all about, well, I'll do this and it'll be good to send over to this magazine or that magazine. Now, after many, many years of writing poetry and having poetry published, it got to the point where there was a particular international journal, a well-known international journal, that the editor would write me and say, do you have something for my next issue? And so in that case, yes, I was sitting down and I was writing a poem that I knew I was writing for that particular publication. But generally, no. When I'm writing poetry, I'm not writing it for a particular market. I'm just getting out what's inside of me. Do you find that true yourself, Raphael?
Yes, I find that true for myself as well. When I'm writing poetry, I'm not thinking about who's my audience going to be, what's the market going to be, what publisher am I going to send it to. I'm just getting out whatever inspiration or whatever it is that is driving me, that needs to come out, that needs to be articulated. That's what I'm trying to get out. And sometimes I don't know what's going to come out, so I can't predict who my audience is going to be or what publisher is going to be a best fit for when I don't even know myself how the poem is going to turn out. When I'm editing my collections and my poems, then I might have a general idea of, this would fit very well with this type of person, or I know this person who would really connect with this. But until then, I'm not writing for a particular market or a particular audience.
Mm-hmm. Exactly, I agree, and I assume that for myself, I'm assuming for you too, that sometimes these accumulate over time. I've got a little backlog of some things that I've written that maybe need to be polished up a little bit more. Maybe they're just written and they're sitting in a file. And if I was going to if I got a note that said, oh, there's such and such poetry contest or something, and I was going to enter it, then I would definitely go and look at their website, look at what they've published before, see what kinds of things they like, and then look through what I have and go, which of these are going to fit better to that one? Because if I send something very political to a non-political publication, it's not even going to get past the first judge. If I send something, you know, very mystical to a very practical, down-to-earth place, then it's not going to get past the first judge. So, but I've already gotten them written at that point. I'm not writing them for that. I'm just looking at what I have and going, what do I have here that would fit with that particular contest or whatever?
To hear you all say that you're just writing because there's something inside that needs to come out would lend one to think, speculate, to assert that we all have poems inside of us. Would you say that?
I definitely would say that. In if not in the sense of poetry as it's known in the Western canon, lines, verse, but poetry in the sense of inspiration and thought and creativity. I believe everybody has that in them. In fact, I was listening to a podcast where they were speaking about NASA has done research on creativity, and NASA. I don't remember how they found these figures, how they came up with these figures, but NASA found that 95% of 5-year-olds are at their creative genius, at their creative peak. And then as time goes on, as people age, only about 1 to 5% of the population still has that creativity. So this out over time, I believe that, if 5% at 5 years old, 95% of people have creativity, then creativity in its most distilled form is poetry. So then by that metric, we all have poetry in us.
Richard?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, certainly that's true. And I think that's a good example that as we get older, some people kind of get that drummed out of them,
Yeah.
But I think if you took a whole group of little kids and had them make up rhymes or something, they would all do it. They'd think it was fun.
Yeah. Kind of like being an artist. I think that gets stifled because my picture doesn't look like Tommy's. And then as it goes on, and if Tommy's picture starts to look like more realistic, then we tend to think that Tommy is a better artist than Jason. But Jason is still an artist.
Mm-hmm.
Jason is creating from Jason's perspective.
Mm-hmm.
So that's unfortunate that that gets dampened. I think Picasso, there's a quote from Picasso about all of us being artists as well, and how we lose that. And that's so unfortunate. As authors, for both of you, writing poems and then writing other kinds of works, what do you think life would be like if you did not tap into that, if you were not able to write? What would your body be like? What would your life be like?
I don't know. I mean, I can't imagine it because it's been my whole life. I mean, I've been writing creatively since high school. I mean, and probably before that, I don't know, but certainly since high school. So for me, it's like, what would it be like if you couldn't breathe, if you couldn't express your emotions, if you couldn't do something? I don't know.
I think for me, at best, it would come out in a different avenue. Um, so poetry is my most natural form of expressing my creativity and my thought, but it hasn't always been my first. Um, I believe music was my first, and so if I weren't writing poetry, it would still the creativity will still come out in another avenue. I've only really been writing poetry in the sense of pen and paper or typing out words since I was in college, only less than 10 years.
Mm.
But I've grown up. I've come from a society and culture that values storytelling and rhythm and music and melody, and all of those
Mhm.
things go together. You find that in poetry. Even poems that do not have a particular form to them or rhyme structure. You find musicality in it. Growing up in Ghana, we have a very big storytelling culture, stories that are passed down about our families and our clans from generation to generation, and also myths, creation myths, moral myths that are passed down in the community. And they haven't been written down for the vast majority of our existence. But there wouldn't be any more, there wouldn't be any less poetry than poetry that is written down in an orthographical form. So at best, I feel that my poetry would come out in a different avenue from what is classically considered poetry in the Western canon. But at worst, like Richard is saying, I don't know. I don't know what I'll do, because if knowing now that poetry, especially writing it, is my most natural form of expressing it. If I didn't have that, I would feel that there's something missing, but I wouldn't have a vocabulary or a way to articulate what that thing is missing. But I'll know that something is not right. I'm not quite fulfilled. And can only imagine, you know, what that could lead to in terms of trying to fulfill that purpose. And it could go a million ways. I could go down the right path and fulfill it, and end up finding what it is that's going to drive that poetry, or I could end up on a very maladaptive and unhealthy path, trying to chase that fulfillment. So at best, it could come out in a different way, and at worst, it could not, and life would be very bleak because of it.
Well, as I'm listening to you all speak about this, and Richard saying, I don't know.
Well, actually, I would say I'm going to back up on that because I would
No,
say,
no, no. It's okay that you say that because to this point, that there are a lot of people who have not found their voice
yes, but I think
in this form.
I don't know that if it's about finding your voice. It's about, and I'm going to jump off a little bit on what Renfield was saying. There's a creative, for me, in my view, there's a creative energy, there's a creative flow.
Uh-huh.
And if you've nurtured that, then it flows in whatever form it's in. And so if you couldn't write anymore, it would manifest in a different way. So I think that as long as you nurture that creativity, that creativity will out in some form. So you said you used to be a singer, a songwriter, so it comes out in that way. For me, I still write poetry, but I'm much more focused on writing novels now. I really enjoy writing novels because it's a bigger canvas, and it takes longer. So you get a longer period that you get to bathe in that creative river because it takes longer to write it. And I found in my poetry, and I haven't read your poetry. I'm sorry, Renfield. So I don't know if this is true for you. In my poetry, though, there are really a couple different kinds of poems that come out. Some are just very emotional expressions of what I've been feeling. There is another form which is almost like a narrative story. I mean, I'm seeing something. It might be about a hummingbird. It might be about a person, but it comes out more like a little story about this thing that I observed. So some are just like emotional outputs. Some are storytelling in a very short form. And from that, I guess I kind of moved into novel writing because, as I say, it takes a long time to do it. So I get to spend a long time with it, enjoying it.
Well, I think that to your point that it could come out in another way, and that depends on the environment that you're in. Renfred talked about, his culture and
Mhm,
being in a culture that values storytelling, that
mhm,
values the expression of words, whether it is through storytelling, poetry, or music.
mhm.
But there are people who don't have that avenue. And I think that there is a song, there's art, there's there's a gift in all of us. And unfortunately, not everybody has an environment that allows that to come forth. So I'm very thankful for what the universe has allowed for both of you all to do, to share it with us. In your writing, something else that I've not asked anybody about. So you write, and then how do you come up with a name? First, how do you come up with a name for the poem? And then how do you come up with a name for the collection of the poems? Where does that come from?
For me, usually at the very end. Rarely, once in a while, I might have an idea, a title for something, but very often, in terms of a poem, um, or in terms of a book, I might get the whole thing done and be playing with like several different possible titles. Um, with a poem, there might be a line someplace in the poem that kind of suggests what its title should be.
Winfrey?
That is a very very marvelous question. I it's hard for me to think of an answer, which is odd because I have spent a lot of time thinking about this very question, about
Have
and
you
this very
really?
notion of yes, about poem titles, because um language and words and sounds, as a poet, they're very meaningful to me. And somebody who grew up in a language rich and sonic rich environment in Ghana. There are multiple languages. Most people know at least three languages in Ghana. So, having different sounds to express things has always been interesting and inspiring to me. And so when it comes to titles, I dwell on them a lot because I want the most sonically aesthetic way to express what the poem is going to be about, what the book is going to be about. At the same time, I want it to carry weight and carry a meaning. So, like Richard was saying, sometimes for me it is a line in the poem or a single word, and sometimes it's it's the theme of the poem, or the inspiration of the poem. And when I'm thinking about titles, I really dwell on them. Like, okay, what title can I pick? Why am I picking these particular string of words to be the title? Is Can I push the boundary more? Can I push the envelope on the wording? Is there something that might catch my attention more? All those things I'm actively thinking about. But then once I've settled on a title and I'm satisfied with it, I stop thinking about it. So then when you ask me a question like that, uh, out of context, I'm not actively trying to think about title for a poem. It's hard to articulate, where a title comes from, for me anyway. Yeah.
Yeah. Now for
And
books,
for my
go ahead.
I was going to say for books, I do know that the titles for my books, that one still are very conscious on my mind because I spent a lot of time thinking about them, and I can trace exactly how they came about. So for my chapbook, the Dedicadas, I being a person who grew up with most of my languages are not English, or in the English Anglophone world. So I wanted to pay homage to that. I wanted to pay to homage to a non-English form of expression. But at the same time, I know that my most of my audience is going to be English speaking, or at least have some English cognate or background. So that's when I try to tailor things to the audience or to a market, because I need to make sure that it also makes sense to them as much as it does to me. So the dedicadas that fit the book, in the sense that each poem is a dedication, and so that root word dedica,
Ah,
that's what fit really well. And it satisfied the fact that it wasn't from English. It's from Spanish and Portuguese, means to dedicate. And thinking about also voices that have been marginalized and oppressed. um, and in those languages, they can be very machismo, masculine types of languages. um, so in Spanish and Portuguese, there is dedicada, which is the feminine form, and there's dedicado, which is the masculine form. And in a general context, dedicado would be the one that would be used. If it was only male dedicado, if it was only female dedicado, if it was female and male dedicado, only if it's female is it dedicada. And and in my growth as a human being, as somebody who wants to allow space for marginalized voices, I found that it would be fitting to put the feminine form of that word as the title instead of the masculine that would be expected. I said
hmm,
no, it needs to be dedicada. The feminine needs to shine. So it kind of has several layers where it was hitting all my checkpoints. Okay, this needs to have good representation. This needs to be sonically pleasing, and be interesting in that it's from a different language, so that draws in the reader. And it also needs to explain what the book is about. Dedications, and it's in that root word. And then the second book, Washed Over, that was just from a line of one of my poems that's in the book. Um,
hmm,
and I was again trying to find a way to express what the collection is about. And so in that, I'm finding that I'm being washed over by all these inspirations. Each poem is inspired by something or somebody. And so I am being washed over by that inspiration, whether it's a negative inspiration like racism, or genocide, or how we're destroying the natural world, or whether it's a positive inspiration, like friends, family, inspirations nonetheless. So, when they're coming into a poem form, there's a reason that I'm writing them, is that they're so powerful that they're washing me over, and there's a
hmm.
need to express them. So, Washed Over was a line in one of my poems, and I decided that that'd be a very fitting way of describing, what the book is about.
Mhm.
Interesting. And your process, Richard?
Well, my poetry collections are normally named for one of the key poems in the book. So there's a particularly strong poem that the book has been built around, and it's the lead poem, and that's actually what the title of the book is. So named after that. But when it comes to novels, um, the novels are more difficult to come up with titles for. I think I sometimes change them. I might have a working title in the beginning, and I sometimes change it throughout the process. And even after it's all finished and I'm in the final stages of editing, I'm probably still changing the title at some point. One of the reasons for that is competition. So one thing I do, for instance, this is I don't know if you can see that or not. Is that
Mhm. What is it? What's the title? I can't read it.
Ragtime Dudes in a Thin Place?
So you have a series of ragtime
I do.
novels.
I do, and this was about three New York dandies who go to New Mexico back in the time of the St. Louis World's Fair back in 1904, and it was about a particular one of the elements in the story was about a particular concept that there's a certain spiritual quality to the mountains in Taos, New Mexico, that the natives have experienced, that the hippies experienced, and that people talk about. There's this kind of vibe in the mountains there, and the Celts had a name for it. They called it a thin place. So I originally was going to call the book Thin Place or Thin Places. But when I went to, before I got around to finalizing it, I went to Amazon and I did a search on Amazon. How many books are already called that? Because you don't want to, particularly with novels, you don't want to go into the market with a name that's confused with a bunch of other people's stuff, or that people who go search for you, they'll find the wrong guy's book and buy that one. So since it was about these three guys who came from the ragtime period, I just eventually came up with this inspiration that I would not call it Thin Place. I would call it Ragtime Dudes in a Thin Place, which was so unusual that nobody else would give it that name.
Yeah, ragtime dudes and ragtime don't necessarily go together.
Right, but they were dudes. They were dudes from New York City.
Yeah. I got that.
And then but unique. And as I wrote the other books in that series, then I just continued that. Each one contained the name Ragtime Dudes, Meet a Paris Flapper, Ragtime Dudes at the World's Fair. So it kind of carried that theme and held the series together too.
Well, you know, you both of you are so very interesting. We certainly could do half hour each by yourselves. This festival that you are attending, you all have done this before. How excited are you when you have this opportunity to meet the readers?
Oh, I think it's a wonderful. I think it's a wonderful experience. Anytime that, I mean, some authors are kind of shy, but I think that it's a wonderful experience anytime that you can have one-on-one contact with people, even if they're not your particular reader. They stop and talk to you for a little bit or something. You get a conversation with them. I think that we're doing something new this year, which is that we're going to have a reception the night before, and the public's invited to that, but it's all the authors are going to be there too. One of the things that happens during the festival is that you're really at your table talking to people that are coming by, talking to people about your books or whatever they're interested in, and you don't really get much chance to talk to other authors except for whoever the person sitting beside you is. So having this event on Friday night is going to give us all a chance to talk to each other and get to know what the other authors who are at the festival, because they're not all from Gainesville. They come from everywhere. They come from Tampa, Fort Myers, Jacksonville, Georgia, Daytona. I mean, just from all over the place. So,
you have some from other states as well. I've interviewed them.
Yeah. So it'll be very interesting to get a chance to meet and talk with other authors.
How is it for you, Reinfred?
Yeah, I'm very excited. Last year's was the first one I've ever been to. I've only been a Florida resident for about 2 years, and my first opportunity would have been during in 2021, because that was the first book I published was in 2021. So yeah, I actually did take my first opportunity, and it was very fun. I like that, it was in my hometown, so it was very fun to see the local crew being represented. It was very nice to connect with my fellow author who I shared a table with, and also the passersby, some of whom turned into readers, some of whom had already been readers, and some of whom were not readers, but it was still nice to engage and connect with people. Whenever people pass by my table, a lot of them, kind of shy away because they assume that expectation is that if they come closer, they are required to buy a book. And I told them, no, you do not have to buy anything. In fact, you can read the whole thing right here. I don't mind. In fact, I'd love for you to read the whole thing. And if you feel like you don't want to buy it, that is okay with me. But just that opportunity to engage with people and connect and really pick at people's minds and see what really ticks behind their eyes. I'm looking forward to and the reading. There will be a reading, I believe, every half hour or every hour at this year's edition, where um, a poet or an author will read excerpts from their book, and there'll be an audience for it. So I'm really looking forward to that as well, seeing because there's something different between reading from the page and then seeing a live atmosphere where somebody is embodying the words and breathing life into it. So I'm excited to see um how Richard breathes life into his work, and how others breathe life into their work as well.
Yeah, and this has been so much fun, so exciting for me to get to meet all of you, and then we're meeting via electronics, and then to be able to see people in person. I think that's going to be absolutely phenomenal. It will be my first book festival with my first book, The Art of Forgiveness. So I am so looking forward to it as well. I really appreciate you gentlemen joining me this evening for Authors in Conversation. And, perhaps we can swing back around and get you one on one so we can hear more. Because, you know, there's so much to talk about with each one of you. Richard, you've written 28 books. We barely scratched the surface. Renfried, all that you've done, and the process of being an award-winning author, and the works that you've done in an area where you might feel like, well, I don't know if anybody's going to read this, but you just do it anyway. So I thank you all for
Hmm.
being an inspiration to all the other authors who don't even know that they're authors yet. So thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Well,
And
I
thank
think,
you, Pamela. Thank you for hosting us and representing the author community and Gainesville at large.
oh, you are so welcome. So welcome. I'm looking forward to meeting both of you in person on the 27th. Richard, I'm glad you pointed out that that is a meet and greet. I didn't realize the public was invited because I actually took the 27th off because I wasn't sure. I thought that was just for the authors.
No, but it's not. It's. I mean, anybody. It's open to the public. Anybody
Okay.
can come, but there's not a public program. It's like they're coming out just to meet us if they
I
come.
think that's wonderful.
Not
I
not.
got I got to put the 27th back in there. If you see that, it says January 28th because I
That's
took it out, but I'll put it back in there, and I can talk about that better. So thank you for mentioning that, Richard. Everybody, I really appreciate you all joining us for Authors in Conversation. Please stay with us. There will be more. And if you missed any of these interviews, you can see all of them on our YouTube channel at the Wellness Network, the word AT, the Wellness Network. Make sure while you're there that you go ahead and subscribe so that you can be notified every time we do another one of these fantastic interviews with these fantastic authors. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Pamela Marshall at the Wellness Radio TV and at the Wellness Radio TV podcast. Remember, there is healing at the well. Make it a fantastic moment. We'll see you next time.